Settled by the Romans in AD 79, Chester has known a remarkable history over the centuries.
The main streets of Chester are lined with many timber-faced buildings known as the Chester Rows. Although their oriel windows and decorative timber work are mostly 19th century, the rows were first built in the 13th and 14th centuries.
The rows consist of a double tier of shops, one at ground level and the other at the first floor level, each provided with a walkway. Many of the rows disappeared, but of those remaining, high-class shops became established beneath their canopies.
The rows can be seen on our right as we walk down crowded Eastgate Street towards the city wall and the East Gate.
The black and white buildings on our left also are a part of the Eastgate Street rows. Many buildings were destroyed in Chester during the Civil War of 1642, but by the end of the 17th century, Chester had recovered and there was an expansion of the existing buildings, new housing and new public and commercial buildings. Although timber remained the most important building material, with the introduction of brick, many of the half-timbered houses were refaced.
The Eastgate clock was erected in 1898 to commemorate the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria.
From on top of the city wall, we were able to see the variety of building styles in Eastgate Street.
The high city walls were originally built by the Romans, but have been rebuilt at intervals in time.
We decided to head south along the pathway on the top of the wall towards the River Dee. Soon we were approaching the tower over Newgate Street.
At Newgate, a plaque on the wall informed us that a massive stone amphitheatre was built near here by the Romans and was partly excavated in the 1960s.
Further along the wall, we looked down on part of the old Roman garden, which we stopped to view in more detail on our return.
A short walk from here and we were alongside the River Dee. At a bend in the wall we were able to see along the river, which today is used mainly for pleasure craft.
The Queen's Park footbridge upstream links the groves on the left to a large area of parkland on the opposite bank of the river.
Downstream we could see the 14th century Old Dee Bridge, which until 1832 was Chester's only bridge across the river.
We decided to return along the wall in the direction of Eastgate and beyond. Our intention was to visit the cathedral.
Looking back, our attention was focused momentarily on a boat moored on the river and a solitary canoeist passing by.
Present-day Chester stands on the site of an ancient Roman fortress, which was constructed on a sandstone plateau in a bend in the River Dee. Hence it obtained the title Diva and became the Romans' chief western legionary fortress.
We paused opposite the old Roman garden, now undergoing considerable amount of refurbishment. The old columns are from the legionary baths, and at the back is a reconstruction of a hypocaust, a hot air space beneath a Roman bath.
We continued along the wall, passing through the tower across Newgate.
A further short walk found us opposite the rear of the cathedral.
Although the cathedral is essentially medieval, Most of the original building has been replaced over the centuries. From this vantage point, we were able to get a good view of the architecture of the south transept, built around 1350.
The cathedral stands on the site of the Anglo-Saxon Church of St Werburgh, where a great Benedictine abbey was founded in 1092.
Leaving the wall, we see the bishop's house, and from here approach the cathedral and enter from the Abbey Square on the north. Until the dissolution of the monasteries in 1540, the abbey was the centre of monastic life. After that date it became the cathedral of the Diocese of Chester.
We entered through the cloisters, which have been extensively rebuilt and restored.
Looking through a cloister window, we had a brief glimpse of the cloister garden outside, which we visit shortly.
Moving into the 145-foot nave with its magnificent arches and ceiling, we were rather startled to hear the strains of organ music and expected to hear some great music from this instrument.
Unfortunately, that short burst was all that was played, so we were rather disappointed.
The Great West Window is recent work, done in 1961 by W.T. Shapland.
The magnificent mosaic panels in the nave date from 1883, and this one depicts King David's grief over his son Absalom, when he speaks that famous passage, "Would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son."
To the left and beyond the nave is the chapel of St Werburgh. The stained glass in the lancet windows is of the 19th century and depicts the Nativity of Jesus.
The choir dates from 1280 to 1300, but the woodwork of the stalls dates from 1380 and is said to be some of the finest surviving medieval woodwork in the country.
The magnificent ceiling dates from 1880 and was cleaned as recently as 1986.
To the rear of the choir, we could see the organ pipes.
We entered the cloister garden, which is completely surrounded by the cloisters and the other sections of the building. It was originally Norman, but rebuilt in the 16th century.
The sculpture is most recent, installed in 1994.
Amongst the shrubs, we found this large magnolia plant in bloom at one end of the garden.
We left the cathedral through the 14th century Abbey gateway, the upper story of which was rebuilt in the late 18th, early 19th century.
A short walk along Eastgate Street and we were facing the main entrance to the cathedral.
Prior to leaving Chester, we stopped to view some old Roman artefacts on the pavement and to post mail in an old post box from the days of Queen Victoria.
That evening we travelled to Duncanhalge at Clayton Le Moors for our overnight accommodation. The history of this house dates back to 1285. A family by the name of Rishtons owned it from around the middle of the 14th to the 16th century, when it was sold to Thomas Walmsley and was later passed on to the Petrys family.
In 1643, Roundhead soldiers occupied this house on the night before the fight at Whalley. Most of our tour party were accommodated in the buildings leading off the courtyard, which was attractively decorated with a variety of shrubs and creepers.
We were accommodated on the first floor, directly over the main entrance of the building.
Our room was tastefully furnished, and I could not help but pay attention to the fireplace, which was similar to the one in my grandparents' home at Kelmscott.
Early next morning we had a splendid view from our window across the grounds of this beautiful estate, which at one time was over 600 acres in size.
After breakfast, we had a brief look around the outskirts of the building and outhouses.
Very soon, however, it was time to pack up and head for the coach.
Some of our party paused for a quick chat to John the concierge,
while the others waited to board the coach for the day's tour onto the Lakes District.